There aren't really a lot of games to play in these early days of 2020, so at that moment I decided to commit myself into one game that I really want to talk about before the big releases come in. Let's talk about the visual novel that spawned pretty much one of the biggest media franchises of all time, ladies and gentlemen, Fate Stay Night. Fate Stay Night is a visual novel developed by Type Moon and first released in January 30th, 2004. The visual novel itself has never been officially released in English, which means that the only way for you to play this visual novel in English is through the fan translation. Now, there are two versions of this game on the PC. There's the original Fate Stay Night that has all the routes, and then there's the royale version that splits the routes into 3 executables and adds a lot of additional content. However, the royale version removes all the H scenes. Thankfully, that can be re-added with additional patches, so if you really want that to be added into the game, make sure you download the additional patches and follow the instructions to install them. This video is going to be talking about Fate based on the royale version. Once you got the game installed, the game pretty much wastes no time and puts you straight into the action, but thankfully you're able to set up the rest of the things that you need, like the text speed. I prefer to read my visual novels at instant text speed with no voiceovers, and lacking any options for this in any visual novel is a sin. The game will start off with a little bit of a lengthy prologue where you take the perspective of Rin Tosaka the tsundere as she attempts to spawn her servant Archer. Why does she need to spawn a servant? Well, that's because her family has been participating in a magical battle royale where the last person and servant who wins gets the Holy Grail and can wish upon whatever they want. That's right guys, the original Fate Stay Night is a battle royale. 7 masters, 7 servants, all trying to kill each other in order to gain the power of the Holy Grail. The only thing that's missing is the characters jumping off of flying buses, but I'd argue that's for the better. The servants of this Holy Grail war consist of historical or mythical figures of the past that got resurrected as heroic spirits to become the servant of a master, which are usually just your normal everyday people living in the modern times, that is the 2000s. One of these unfortunate masters is a man by the name of Shiro Emiya, your everyday high schooler that doesn't have anything special from him aside from the fact that he can use magic to fix a bunch of things. After accidentally witnessing a rather fierce battle between Archer and another servant Lancer, he got killed by a Lancer by a stab through the chest. He then got saved by Rin Tosaka the tsundere, but as he runs back to his house, Lancer caught up to him once again. But this time, Shiro managed to accidentally spawn his own servant Saber, and Shiro has now involuntarily participated in the Battle Royale game. Can he survive the Battle Royale game? And what kind of wish that he wants to grant when he finally achieved the Holy Grail? Seriously, I don't get why people are saying that Fate is a complicating franchise. At its core is a battle royale between masters and servants, plain and simple. Sure, there are tons of lore and world building, but all of that is built on a simple battle royale story. Sure, it spawns so many freaking media franchises, but it's really not that hard to figure out which media franchise does what, because for the most part they preserve the Fate Stay Night continuity as much as they could. So how does the Fate Stay Night visual novel work? Now, here's where things get a bit more complicating. The visual novel has 3 routes. The first route is the original Fate route, the second route is the Unlimited Blade Works, and the third route is Heaven's Feel. You have to play the game through the order that I specified, which is Fate, Unlimited Blade Works, and finally Heaven's Feel. Why? Because the game would lock you out of the routes and give you bad endings anyway. Every route will have many different bad endings, and you'll be taken straight into a comedic section in the game called Tiger Dojo, where Taiga and Ilya just straight up scolds you for picking up the wrong decision. But you need to get all the bad endings and the true/good or normal endings on all the routes to get to the very final epilogue. Or just watch them on YouTube. So what are the differences between each of the routes? While they mostly have the same prologue, they do have a different focus on what story to tell. On the surface level, Fate focuses on Saber, Unlimited Blade Works focuses on Rin, and Heaven's Feel focuses on Sakura. But characters aren't the only thing that those routes are focusing on. Fate mostly focuses on the overall plot and scratching just a tiny bit on the Holy Grail's true nature. Unlimited Blade Works is focused on Shiro's character development and his connection with Archer. And and please, if you're a Fate veteran, do not spoil it, because my friend accidentally did because he thought it was common knowledge for everyone. Heaven's Feel focuses on the Holy Grail's origin story and the terrifying horror that Sakura suffers from. So after I played through all the 3 routes, which took me around 12 hours each, and that's on instant text with no voice, have I figured out why this franchise becomes incredibly popular? Yes, actually, but a better question for this conversation would be, where to start? The Master Servant formula of the Fate franchise is basically an amazing template for creativity. The servants can be many things from across the history, ranging from mythical figures to historical figures. The Masters can be some random high schooler that got access to way too many powers, or it can be you. Yes, you, the people at home playing your gacha games and collecting all the waifus and husbandos. But to me at least, one of the key driving factors in why Fate is loved by many is the fact that it's really good at what it does. At its core, Fate Stay Night is just your typical dark fantasy, but in the anime sphere, it's the typical dark fantasy. Compared to any other fantasy genres, Fate Stay Night doesn't really do anything special that makes it stand out, but for what it tries to do, it's really good at it. The dark fantasy elements is actually dark, so you're gonna see blood being spilled, body parts being chopped off, the pedophilic and incestuous undertones, and of course, the Lovecraftian horror. But all of that is not for the sake of spectacle. It's done to complement the dark nature of the storyline. The darkness of Fate is used to highlight the harsh reality of the Holy Grail War. In a universe where you are selected as a person to control a magical servant to kill each other to retrieve the Holy Grail, there's bound to be a lot of blood to be spilled and the lives of innocent people being put under the crossfire. All of the characters have to endure the harsh reality of the battle, with Shiro in particular having to get out of every battle with at least one broken limb every single time. While he does have the spirit of being a fighter, he himself really isn't one, especially against the infinitely more powerful servants. At least he heals pretty fast. Not only that they have to deal with the physical toll of the battle, they also have to deal with the mental toll. It's really weird to say that. One of the key aspects of the plot is the wish that you want to be granted when you gain the Holy Grail, because that speaks a lot about you. It's not just the wish themselves, but also the motivation, the drive, and the methods of reaching them. This is one of the crucial aspects of the character development, as the characters will have differing opinions in what they want to do and why they want to do them, and thanks to those differences, the characters will have conflicts towards each other. One of the most interesting villains that actually got a lot more development as you go through the routes is Shinji. No, not that one, this one. At first, Shinji is just a cowardly brat and a disposable villain like in the Fate route, but he gets quite a lot more focus as time goes on, especially in Heaven's Feel, what with him being Sakura's brother and all. My opinion on the character shifts from hating him to just pitying him, not in a I feel bad for you way, but more like, wow, you are such a pathetic waste of time and space way. That's what I really love about Fate. My opinion on the characters grow as I play the routes. Shiro in particular went through a very interesting development. He's actually rather annoying in Fate, especially his attitude towards women. Just be glad that Saber is incredibly patient when dealing with Shiro, basically being like, no Saber, this is how women are supposed to behave. He actually got a lot better in the next 2 routes. Unlimited Blade Works do give him a lot more time to shine, and Heaven's Feel actually just tones him down into a horror protagonist. Aside from his total inexperience towards dealing with women, he's a solid protagonist that drives the plot and can actually make rational decisions that develop his character. But Fate also suffers the same problem as Persona, as in characters that become the main focus on specific parts, gaining less focus as time went on, which is to be expected when the 3 routes are focusing on different characters and themes, but I still have to mention it in case if your favorite character is Saber, for example. Saber is a major character in the Fate route, turned into a side character in Unlimited Blade Works, and turned into something else entirely in Heaven's Feel that I won't spoil. Archer doesn't get that much focus in the first one, gets major focus in the second, and goes back to not much focus in the third one. It is to be expected, but I still need to mention it nonetheless. And speaking of the routes, what are my opinions on each route? Well, the original Fate route to me is more of a typical shonen with dark dark fantasy elements. What I mean by that is the story is structured to be more like a shonen anime that puts more emphasis on action, characters, and sometimes even comedy, but it also has that spice of blood, gore, and there was a freaking threesome in the middle of the story if you went with the uncensored version. Unlimited Blade Works is basically just Fate, but with a different character and motivation focus. It still has the same shonen-esque story structure, it still has the focus towards action and characters, but it does have a little bit more of that dark fantasy spice. And that's precisely why I thought the first two routes are good, but not great. For what they're trying to accomplish on each route, they hit most of the beats pretty well. It does its character development really well, it does its action really well, it does its comedic moments really well, but it's nothing that I haven't seen a million times before, and thanks to the story being structured more like a shonen, it doesn't really scratch my particular itch. I enjoyed them, I recognize why they're really good, but it's not my cup of tea if you get what I mean. But then Heaven's Feel started. Without a doubt, Heaven's Feel is my favorite route of all three. Heaven's Feel is not a shonen with dark fantasy elements. Heaven's Feel is straight up horror. It's the kind of horror that might make something like Saya no Uta raise its eyebrows. And it's interesting how the writer of that, Gen Urobuchi, not only are friends with Fate's creator Kinoko Nasu, but also wrote the prequel Fate Zero. Heaven's Feel is such a radical shift in tone, plot element focus, and characters that you might or might not see coming, depending on your familiarity on Fate. If you thought the first two routes have dark elements, hoo boy, be prepared to be terrified on this one. Heaven's Feel has significantly less emphasis on action and character motivation. It still has those, but not as much as the first two routes. Instead, it has more emphasis on body horror, psychological horror, mental deterioration, and it loves to add more and more people into the body count. The main character of the route is Sakura, and this route pulls zero punches on her. Whatever horrible thing that you can imagine being done towards Sakura, this route has it, and it just utterly destroys her, both physically and mentally. It's also not afraid of straight up killing major characters with no remorse, and the route's major dilemma is a lot more profound and interesting to explore. It's really strange that Heaven's Feel is my favorite route because I'm not really that much fan of horror, but thanks to Heaven's Feel being radically different to the first two routes, it might even get a spot in my all-time favorite visual novels. Fate being your dark fantasy action anime was good, but not great. It doesn't do enough for me to make it stand out compared to any other stories. If you look at the most popular Fate media, sure, a lot of them have dark aspects, but for the most part, they're focused on being your typical fantasy action. The anime that got Fate into the spotlight is mostly based on the Fate route and is a dark fantasy action. Same goes for their Unlimited Blade Works adaptation. The point that I'm trying to say is that Fate as a franchise has sidetracked from dark fantasy action into, well, today's menu for a Mia family. Sure, it got big thanks to the original visual novel, but in order to hit that mass market appeal, the franchise either removed or toned down anything that would give it an adult rating. The visual novel is even gorier compared to the anime, although maybe it's because a lot of it is left for the imagination, like that section where is practically cut in half. And of course, the most notorious element that got toned down were the hentai scenes, and this might be a hot take, but I really like the hentai scenes. Yes, they're silly and incredibly forced, but one, they make sense in context, especially in Heaven's Feel, and two, Shiro earned them, to be honest. The toned down versions just don't have the same impact, especially when anime Fate Stay Night has those really bad CGI dragon. Now sure, Fate doesn't really need the gore and the sex to be good. In fact, a lot of Fate media are good and incredibly popular without those two things. You might even argue that Fate not having those two things in the long term is even better for its popularity and the sustainability of this behemoth of a franchise. And while that is debatable, that's not the point that I'm trying to make. The point that I'm trying to make is that the Fate franchise is so big that we got overexposed by so many Fate media that are more toned down, media that are more popular and totally overshadow the darker, gorier, and raunchier original. And that's why I love Heaven's Feel. Heaven's Feel is a breath of fresh air. Fate being horror is a breath of fresh air. It's different to the other Fate media that I and a lot of other people got exposed to. Q2U. Now, the Heaven's Feel adaptation is still ongoing, with the third film about to be released this year, and from what I've seen, the adaptation really sticks on that horror tone, and it doesn't shy away from the fact that got laid. No, you don't have to show it in detail. Just show that it happened. You don't have to deny that it happened or change it into something else entirely. And they did show that it happened in the films. Heaven's Feel shows that more people need to see Fate being horror. And no, it doesn't have to be horror all the time. Once in a while would be nice. Fate being hentai, well, okay, that's been done to death. But Fate being horror though, we don't see that very often. And that's the good stuff. So in conclusion, the Fate franchise reached its popularity because of so many different things, with the original visual novel being the catalyst of all the other media. The master-servant concept and the servants being heroic spirits of past historical figures are very interesting. It spawned many different adaptations and spin-offs and made tons and tons of money. It's not just the concept of the series, the characters themselves are so iconic that people just want to see them more outside of the original story, like them just hanging out and eating food and stuff. But the core of all the popularity is the original Fate Stay Night visual novel, the visual novel that truly started everything. It's the one visual novel that is not afraid of pulling any punches and shows how incredibly dark, disturbing, and horrific the Fate universe can be. The Fate and Unlimited Bladeworks route showed a darker and raunchier version of the events compared to the animes, or at least if you have the uncensored version, but nothing out of the ordinary as far as dark fantasy stories go. Heaven's Feel is where it truly shows its dark tentacles of horror, a sight that I think anyone, including the Fate fans who have never played the visual novels, and I know that there are tons of you out there, should totally experience. I'm not that much of a fan of the Fate series, and to be perfectly honest, I'm still not. This journey is more of an educational one, and I really enjoyed taking my time to talk about this visual novel in retrospect. If you would like to enjoy this visual novel, let me remind you all that this visual novel has not been officially released in English, and there might be other shadier ways for you to get this visual novel. In however ways you get the visual novel, don't forget to get the English patch and the hentai scenes if you really need those.